There is someone in Windhelm who knows which women walk home alone at night. He watches their routines, he knows when the guards change shifts, and he has already claimed 3 people by the time you arrive in the city. This is happening now, in a city where you buy and sell goods, where you rent a room for the night, where children play in the streets. And it is one of dozens of horrors operating in plain sight across Skyrim, hidden behind normal faces and locked doors. There are people in Markarth who go to work during the day and eat human flesh at night. They are not monsters. They are citizens with jobs and homes who gather in caves beneath the city to consume corpses as acts of worship. This analysis will examine the invisible horror of Skyrim, the serial killers walking among normal citizens, the cults operating beneath cities, and the organizations that demand your soul in exchange for power. These are not dragons announcing themselves with fire. These are horrors that look normal until you open the wrong door, follow the wrong blood trail, or accept the wrong invitation. If you enjoy these type of deep dives, please drop a comment letting me know and give us a boost in the algorithm. So now get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's start. Chapter 1. The Absence That Never Explains Itself. Picture walking into a bedroom where breakfast is still on the table. The food has turned to dust over centuries, but the fork is right where someone dropped it. The chair is pushed back at the exact angle it was when they stood up, and on the floor next to that chair is a pile of ash in the rough shape of a person. This scene repeats through every room of every Dwemer city you will ever enter in Skyrim. Bedrooms, workshops, meeting halls, guard posts, thousands of locations where people were doing ordinary things when something reduced them to ash without moving anything else in the room. The Dwemer disappeared in the year 700 of the First Era. The event happened during the Battle of Red Mountain, a conflict between the Dwemer and the Chimer over control of a divine artifact called the Heart of Lorkhan. The Dwemer had discovered this artifact deep inside Red Mountain in Morrowind. The heart belonged to Lorkhan, a god in the Elder Scrolls pantheon, and it possessed immense power. The Dwemer's chief engineer, a man named Kagranak, had been developing tools specifically designed to tap into that power. These tools were called Wraithguard, Keening, and Sundare. What Kagranak wanted to accomplish with these tools remains unclear. The evidence suggests he was attempting to use the Heart of Lorkhan to achieve something related to divinity or transcendence for the entire Dwemer race. Whether he succeeded, failed, or accomplished something entirely different from his intentions cannot be determined from the ruins they left behind. What can be determined is that when Kagranak used his tools on the Heart of Lorkhan, every single Dwemer in existence vanished simultaneously. This was not a gradual disappearance. It was not an evacuation. It was not a plague or a war that slowly reduced their numbers. Every Dwemer everywhere across the entire continent of Tamriel ceased to exist in the same instant. The Dwemer had settlements in Skyrim, Morrowind, Hammerfell, and High Rock. When they vanished from all of these locations at once. The only exception was a single Dwemer named Yagrum Bagarn, who was in another plane of existence at the time of the disappearance. When he returned to Tamriel, he found his entire race gone. The way the ruins were discovered tells you something about the nature of the event. When the previously untouched Dwemer ruins of Bam's Amshend in Mournhold were opened, investigators found piles of ash next to weapons and armor. They found ash on chairs, in beds, in positions that suggested people had been sitting or sleeping when they were reduced to ash. The positioning of these remains indicates that whatever happened to the Dwemer happened too quickly for them to react. They did not run. They did not fight. They did not even stand up from their chairs. The Dwemer were an advanced civilization, possibly the most technologically sophisticated race that ever existed in Tamriel. They built cities entirely underground, hollowing out massive cavern systems beneath Skyrim and connecting them through a network called Blackreach. They created automatons that still function perfectly in the Fourth Era, thousands of years after their creators disappeared. These machines are self-repairing, self-maintaining, and capable of complex defensive behaviors. The engineering required to build machines that last for millennia without any maintenance is almost incomprehensible. They developed technologies that other races in Tamriel still cannot replicate. The Oculori in Mzulft was designed to collect starlight, transmute it, split it, and project it as energy that could reveal locations of magical power across all of Tamriel. The device requires precise calibration with a focusing crystal, and when properly aligned, it functions as a continental-scale magical detection system. This represents an understanding of astronomy, optics, and magical theory that no other civilization in Skyrim's history has matched. But alongside their technological advancement, the Dwemer possessed a worldview that set them apart from every other race in Tamriel. They rejected the concept of gods. In a world where divine beings demonstrably exist and regularly intervene in mortal affairs, the Dwemer maintained that these entities were not worthy of worship. They viewed the Aedra and Daedra as powerful beings, but not as deities deserving reverence. This atheistic stance was not born from ignorance. The Dwemer understood magic, understood the nature of divinity in their world, and consciously chose to reject it. This rejection went deeper than simple disbelief. The Dwemer actively sought to supersede divine power through technological and magical means. Kagranak's work on the Heart of Lorkhan can be understood as an attempt to achieve through engineering what the gods achieved through their nature. Whether he was trying to ascend the Dwemer race to godhood, trying to create an artificial god, or trying to access some form of transcendence that existed outside traditional divinity, the evidence supports the conclusion that Kagranak was attempting to fundamentally alter the relationship between his people and the metaphysical structure of the Elder Scrolls universe. The tools he created to interact with the Heart of Lorkhan were not simple instruments. Wraithguard protected the user from the Heart's power. Keening and Sunder were designed to manipulate the Heart directly. These were not weapons in any conventional sense. They were reality-altering tools built to interface with the literal heart of a god. The precision required to even conceptualize such tools suggests that Kagranak understood divine mechanics at a level that would be terrifying if you stopped to think about what he was actually attempting to do. When Kagranak used these tools during the Battle of Red Mountain, the Dwemer disappeared. Every account agrees on this timing. The Chimer forces led by Indoril Nerevar were advancing on the Dwemer positions. Kagranak activated his tools. The Dwemer vanished. The sequence is consistent across every historical source, but the mechanism remains unknown. In the Fourth Era, a researcher at the College of Winterhold, named Arniel Gain, attempted to recreate the circumstances of the Dwemer's disappearance. He obtained Keening, one of Kagranak's tools, and conducted experiments trying to replicate whatever Kagranak had done to the Heart of Lorkhan. Arniel used a warped soul gem in place of the heart, believing he could learn what happened to the Dwemer, recreating the event on a smaller scale. When he performed his experiment, Arniel vanished in exactly the same manner the Dwemer did. He simply ceased to exist, leaving no body, no ash, no trace of what happened to him. This strengthens the theory that Kagranak's use of the tools was the direct cause of the Dwemer's disappearance, but it does not explain where they went or why the event occurred. Theories range from complete annihilation to displacement to another plane of existence to some form of failed transcendence that erased them from reality itself. None of these theories can be confirmed. The Dwemer left behind no indication that they knew this was going to happen. Their cities show no signs of preparation, no evacuation procedures, no contingency plans. Walking through a Dwemer ruin in Skyrim forces you to confront the implications of instantaneous cultural extinction. You will find workshops where projects were left unfinished, You will find living quarters where personal belongings remain exactly as they were placed. You will find evidence of ordinary life frozen at the moment it ended. The automatons continue to patrol these spaces, following programming that tells them to defend inhabitants who have been gone for thousands of years. The machines do not know their creators are dead. They will continue defending empty cities until their mechanisms finally fail, which based on their current condition could be thousands more years from now. This creates a specific kind of horror that has nothing to do with immediate threat. You are not in danger from the disappearance itself. It already happened, millennia ago, to people who have been dust longer than your civilization has existed. But you are walking through spaces that were never meant to be empty. These cities were built to house millions. The infrastructure could support a thriving underground civilization. Everything still works, and there is nobody left to use any of it. The Dwemer also left behind their relationship with another race, one that experienced a fate arguably worse than instantaneous disappearance. Before the Dwemer vanished, they had taken in the Falmer, the Snow Elves, who once controlled all of Skyrim. The Dwemer offered the Falmer refuge from genocide at the hands of the Nords, but the price of that refuge was slavery, blindness, and a transformation so complete that by the Fourth Era, the Falmer are no longer recognizable as the civilization they once were. The horror of the Dwemer is not that they disappeared. The horror is that their disappearance left everything functional except the people. It left a civilization's worth of technology still operating in the service of nobody. It left questions that can never be answered, because the only people who knew the answers were reduced to ash, before they could document what was happening to them. It left behind the possibility that Kagrenak succeeded in whatever he was trying to do, and the result was so catastrophic that it erased his entire race from existence. You can stand in Blackreach, the massive underground cavern system that connected Dwemer cities across Skyrim, and understand that you're looking at an infrastructure project of almost incomprehensible scale. The Dwemer hollowed out space for an entire civilization to exist below the surface. They lit these caverns with bioluminescent fungi. They created a transit network that allowed them to move between cities without ever emerging into the daylight. They built this across multiple holds, connecting distant cities through a single underground system, and then they vanished, leaving all of it intact for anyone who stumbled into it afterwards. The War of the First Council, the conflict during which the Dwemer disappeared, had been ongoing for 32 years. This was not a sudden conflict. This was a protracted war between the Dwemer and the Chimer over theological and political disagreements. The Chimer objected to the Dwemer's plans to use the Heart of Lorkhan. The Dwemer proceeded anyway. When the final battle occurred at Red Mountain, both sides had invested decades into this conflict. And then one side simply ceased to exist, not through military defeat, but through something their own chief engineer did to them. The Chimer won the war by default, but they did not conquer the Dwemer cities. They did not occupy Dwemer territory, because the Dwemer vanished so completely that there was nothing left to conquer except empty ruins and functioning machines. The Chimer found themselves in possession of territory their enemies had abandoned instantaneously, filled with technology they could not fully understand or replicate. Later, after the Chimer became the Dunmer through their own transformation, scholars attempted to study what the Dwemer had left behind. Telvanni wizards pored over Dwemer texts. The tribunal used the same tools Kagrenak had created to achieve their own form of divinity, but nobody could determine what had actually happened to the Dwemer themselves. You find books in Dwemer ruins that discuss their philosophical outlook. The Dwemer wrote extensively about their understanding of reality, their theories about the nature of divinity, their engineering principles. None of these texts indicate that they expected to disappear. None of them read like the final words of a civilization that knew it was about to end. They are technical documents, philosophical treatises, mundane records of a functioning society. The discontinuity between the ordinary tone of these documents and the absolute finality of the Dwemer's disappearance creates cognitive dissonance that never fully resolves. The last Dwemer spent 3,000 years traveling across different planes of existence looking for any trace of his people. He found nothing. Whatever happened to the Dwemer removed them so completely from every plane of existence that even someone who spent millennia searching could not locate a single trace of where they went. Yagrum eventually contracted Corporus, a divine disease that prevented him from dying but left him unable to continue his search. In the Third Era, he resided in the Corpusarium of Tel Fir, the last living member of a race that was erased from reality. When you encounter Dwemer ghosts in some ruins, you are not encountering the actual Dwemer. You are encountering revenant spirits, aggressive echoes that attack anything living they detect. These ghosts do not communicate. They do not provide information. They are hostile remnants that serve no purpose except to attack anyone who enters spaces that used to be their homes. Whether these represent fragments of Dwemer souls or something else entirely created by the manner of their disappearance remains unclear. The Dwemer's relationship with the Falmer reveals another dimension of who they were as a civilization. When the Falmer came to the Dwemer seeking refuge from the Nordic genocide that was systematically exterminating them across Skyrim, the Dwemer agreed to shelter them. But the terms of that shelter involved forcing the Falmer to consume toxic fungi that rendered them blind. This was not an accidental side effect. This was deliberate. The Dwemer blinded an entire race as a condition of providing them safety. The fungi did not just cause blindness. It fundamentally altered Falmer biology across generations. By the Fourth Era, the Falmer have devolved into twisted creatures that bear little resemblance to the proud snow elf civilization they once were. Their bodies have changed. Their culture has been destroyed. Their language is lost. They live in the ruins of their oppressors, unable to remember what they used to be or why they should hate the ruins they now inhabit. This reveals something essential about Dwemer culture. They were willing to preserve another race, but only after rendering them helpless and dependent. They were willing to share their underground cities, but only with slaves who could not threaten them or compete with them. The choice to systematically blind the Falmer suggests a civilization that viewed other races as tools or subjects rather than equals. The Dwemer's atheistic stance might have freed them from religious constraints, but it did not make them compassionate. After the Dwemer disappeared, the Falmer remained in the ruins. They inherited the cities of their oppressors through default, not conquest, and that inheritance was a poisoned gift, because by the time the Dwemer vanished, the Falmer had already been transformed into something that could never rebuild what they lost. Chapter 2. The Descent that Continues After the Fall. The Falmer were not always creatures of darkness. During the Merethic era, they controlled Skyrim. Their civilization rivaled the Altmer culture of the Somerset Isles in sophistication and wealth. They built temples dedicated to their gods, particularly Ariel, their chief deity. The chantry covered an entire valley, a monument to snow elf religious devotion and architectural achievement. They created way shrines across Skyrim as part of pilgrimage routes for those seeking enlightenment. They possessed magical ability, cultural identity, and a functional society that had existed for thousands of years. Then the Atmarons arrived from across the northern sea. The snow elves and the early Nords coexisted for a period, though the exact nature of this coexistence remains unclear. What is clear is that eventually the snow elves attacked the Atmaran settlement of Sarthal during an event known as the Night of Tears. The attack devastated Sarthal. The reasons for the attack are disputed. Some theories suggest the snow elves discovered that something of immense power was buried beneath Sarthal, possibly the Eye of Magnus, and attacked to seize it. Other theories propose cultural or territorial tensions. The actual motivation is lost. What is not lost is what happened after. A man named Ysgramor survived the attack along with his 2 sons. They fled back to Atmora and returned with 500 warriors called the Companions. These warriors did not come to negotiate or establish boundaries. They came to systematically eradicate the Snow Elves from Skyrim. The Companions marched through Skyrim, killing every Snow Elf they encountered. They enslaved survivors and forced them to construct Nordic cities. Whiterun and Windhelm were built by Falmer slaves, many of whom died during construction or from mistreatment by their captors. The war was not a single battle. It was a genocide campaign that lasted for years. The Companions hunted Snow Elves across Skyrim, burning their settlements, destroying their temples, killing anyone they found. The Snow Elves attempted to regroup to mount organized resistance. They retreated to the island of Solstheim and rallied under the leadership of a figure known as the Snow Prince. The Nords pursued them even there. The Battle of Mostring on Solstheim marked the effective end of Snow Elf civilization. During the battle, the Snow Prince killed a Nord woman named Finna's mother. Finna, who was just a child, picked up her mother's sword and threw it through the Snow Prince's chest. Without their leader, the remaining Snow Elves scattered. Some may have retreated to isolated locations and survived in small groups, but the majority had only one option left: seek refuge from anyone who would take them in. They turned to the Dwemer. The Dwemer were their elven cousins, distant relatives who had built cities underground, where the Nords could not easily reach them. The Snow Elves came to the Dwemer not as conquerors or equals, but as refugees fleeing extermination. They were desperate, defeated, and vulnerable. The Dwemer agreed to shelter them. The price for that shelter was consuming a toxic fungus that grew deep underground. The Dwemer told the Snow Elves that this fungus was necessary for survival in the underground cities, that without it they could not adapt to life below the surface. The Snow Elves, who had no other options and no way to verify what they were being told, consumed the fungus. It rendered them blind, all of them. Across every generation that followed, every Falmer born underground would be blind from birth. This was not mercy. This was a calculated decision to permanently disable an entire race before allowing them into Dwemer cities. The Dwemer wanted slaves, not refugees. They wanted a dependent population that could never challenge them, never leave them, never recover enough to threaten Dwemer interests. By blinding the Snow Elves, the Dwemer guaranteed that even if the Falmer wanted to return to the surface, they would be at a catastrophic disadvantage in a world they could no longer see. The blinding was just the beginning. The Dwemer subjected the Falmer to generations of slavery and abuse. Torture chambers have been found in every Dwemer ruin in Skyrim, suggesting systematic brutalization was a normal part of how the Dwemer maintained control over their slaves. The relationship was not one of grudging coexistence. It was master and slave, oppressor and victim, maintained through violence and the permanent disability the Dwemer had inflicted on the Falmer population. Over time, the fungus and the conditions of underground slavery changed the Falmer in ways that went beyond blindness. Their bodies adapted to life in darkness. Their senses of hearing and smell became more acute to compensate for their lack of vision. Their posture changed, perhaps from years of feeling their way through dark tunnels. Their ears and nostrils became more pronounced. Generation after generation, the Falmer diverged further from what Snow Elves had been. The changes were partly biological adaptation, partly the result of living in an environment completely alien to the one their ancestors had evolved in, and partly unknown factors related to the specific fungus the Dwemer had forced them to consume. The cultural loss was even more complete than the physical transformation. The Falmer forgot their language, they forgot their gods, they forgot their history. The proud civilization that had rivaled the Altmer was reduced to slaves, who knew nothing except the underground cities and the masters who controlled them. They lost their names, their stories, their reasons for continuing to exist. The Dwemer took more than their freedom. They took their identity. At some point, the Falmer rebelled. After generations of slavery, they rose up against the Dwemer in a conflict called the War of the Crag. This war raged beneath Skyrim in the caverns of Blackreach, completely unknown to the Nords and other surface-dwelling races. The Dwemer had the advantage of technology, but they were also occupied with the ongoing war of the First Council against the Chimer on the surface. The Falmer were fighting for their survival, for any chance to break free from the species that had deliberately destroyed them. Then in the year 700 of the First Era, the Dwemer disappeared. The Falmer won the War of the Crag by default. They found themselves in possession of cities they had been slaves in, surrounded by technology they did not understand, and could not use because they could not see it. They inherited their oppressor's legacy without gaining any of the tools to benefit from it, and by that point they had already been changed so thoroughly that freedom meant very little. The irony is suffocating. The Falmer spent generations as slaves to a race that vanished suddenly and completely, leaving the slaves behind in cities built by their masters. The Falmer were free, but they were free as blind, traumatized remnants of what they had been. They were free in darkness, in ruins, with no cultural memory of what freedom had meant to their ancestors, who still had eyes and cities of their own. After the Dwemer disappeared, the Falmer did not rebuild. They could not. They had forgotten how. Instead, they continued living in the Dwemer ruins, scavenging materials to build crude tents and armor. They became hostile to anything they encountered, attacking indiscriminately anything that entered their territory. Whether this aggression stemmed from trauma from generations of being attacked by their masters, or from some effect of the fungus they continued to consume cannot be determined. But by the Fourth Era, the Falmer are hostile creatures that live in darkness and attack anyone who ventures into the ruins they inhabit. Some Falmer have been observed keeping chorus, large insects they use as mounts and sources of chitin for armor. This suggests they retained some capacity for husbandry or training, some practical knowledge that survived even after their culture died. But they build nothing permanent. They create nothing new. They exist in spaces created by another civilization, wearing scavenged materials, perpetually hostile and perpetually blind. The transformation is not just physical or cultural. At some point between becoming slaves and becoming the creatures encountered in Skyrim, the Falmer lost something metaphysical. In the Elder Scrolls universe, sentient beings possess what are called black souls, a classification that distinguishes them from animals. By the Fourth Era, some observations suggest that Falmer souls may have degraded to the point where they are no longer categorized as black souls. If true, this would mean the Falmer have descended so far from what they were that even their fundamental metaphysical nature has changed. Not all. Snow elves followed their kin into Dwemer cities. A very small number rejected the Dwemer's offer and chose to hide elsewhere in Skyrim. These snow elves avoided both the Nordic genocide and the Dwemer's poisoning. By the Fourth Era, at least two of these uncorrupted snow elves still existed: Knight Paladin Gelibor and his brother, Arch-Curate Verthur. They lived in the Chantry of Auriel, maintaining the ancient snow elf religion in isolation. Gelibor refers to the transformed Falmer as the betrayed, and expresses pity for what they have become. He rejects the name Falmer for himself, preferring to be called a snow elf, maintaining the distinction between what his people were and what the Dwemer turned them into. When you encounter Gelibor in Skyrim, you are meeting someone who remembers what the snow elves were capable of, who knows what was lost, and who has spent thousands of years watching his twisted kin raid and defile the few sacred places that remain from snow elf civilization. Verthur's story reveals another dimension of the Falmer tragedy. He was infected by a vampire during his duties and became a vampire himself. Over thousands of years, his isolation and his condition warped him. He came to blame Ariel for allowing the snow elves to fall, and he dedicated himself to a plan to destroy the sun itself as revenge against the god he felt had abandoned his people. His descent into hatred and nihilism demonstrates what millennia of isolation can do, even to those who escaped the physical transformation of the betrayed. The chantry itself was eventually raided by the betrayed. The transformed Falmer, who had lost all memory of what the chantry represented. They attacked and killed many of the snow elf priests who had maintained the site. The priests became spectral prelates, spirits that Ariel preserved so they could continue their duties even after death. This created the grotesque situation where the last remnants of snow elf religion are maintained by the ghosts of dead priests, while the descendants of their civilization mindlessly attack the holy site, unable to recognize what it meant to their ancestors. You can walk through the chantry of Ariel and see both the beauty of what snow elf civilization created and the horror of what their descendants have become. The architecture is intact, the way shrines still function, the sacred spaces still hold power, and crawling through these spaces are blind, twisted creatures who have no idea they are desecrating their own cultural heritage. They cannot read the inscriptions. They cannot appreciate the religious significance. They are simply hostile occupants of a space they do not understand. This is the horror of the Falmer. Not that they fell, but that they continue existing after their fall. They are not extinct. They are transformed into something that cannot remember what it lost. The Dwemer disappeared and left empty cities. The Falmer remained and lost everything except their bodies, which changed into forms their ancestors would not recognize. They inhabit the ruins of two civilizations, their own, which was destroyed by the Nords, and the Dwemer's, which was destroyed by its own hubris. And they understand neither. When you fight Falmer in a Dwemer ruin in Skyrim, you are fighting victims. They attack you because they attack everything. They have no capacity for negotiation, no interest in communication. The transformation the Dwemer inflicted on them has made them unable to be anything except hostile. They have been denied even the mercy of extinction. They persist, generation after generation, in darkness and hatred, unable to die out and unable to recover. The cruelty of their fate intensifies when you realize it is ongoing. The Falmer are not a historical tragedy. They are a present tense nightmare. Every Falmer born in the Fourth Era is born into a life of blindness, violence, and cultural emptiness, without any hope of escaping the inheritance their ancestors' destroyers gave them. The Dwemer are gone, but the consequences of what the Dwemer did continue without end, and here is where the true weight settles. The Dwemer could have simply refused the Falmer refuge. They could have turned them away. Instead, they accepted them and systematically destroyed them over generations. They created a new form of horror, survival as something unrecognizable to what you once were. The Dwemer's disappearance ended their story instantly. The Falmer's transformation means their story never ends. It just continues getting worse across millennia they cannot escape. That explains how entire civilizations can be erased through different mechanisms. The Dwemer vanished and left questions. The Falmer were transformed and became the answer nobody wanted to face. But what happens when the horror is not ancient history, when it is not measured in eras and millennia? What happens when the nightmare is current, when it is happening in real time in a city where people are trying to go about normal lives, while a killer stalks them through the streets? Chapter 3. The Butcher Who Walks Among the Living. Windhelm sits in the frozen northeast of Skyrim, built by Isgrimor himself using Falmer slaves who died during its construction. The city is ancient, cold, and divided into districts that reflect centuries of social stratification. The Palace of the Kings dominates the upper level. The Grey Quarter houses the Dwemer refugees that Windhelm grudgingly tolerates. And somewhere in these stone streets, women are being murdered. The killings follow a pattern. Young women, alone at night, bodies found with distinctive lacerations, torn and mutilated in ways that suggest the killer has specific knowledge of anatomy. The murders happen in a city where the guards are too occupied with the Civil War to conduct proper investigations. Windhelm is a city at war with itself even before you factor in a serial killer, split between Stormcloak loyalty and Imperial suspicion, between Nord tradition and refugee resentment. In this environment, a killer can operate for an extended period because nobody in authority has the time or resources to stop him. The victims have names. Frigga Shattershield died first, killed in her own home, in a house called Yerim. Susanna the Wicked, a barmaid at Candlehearth Hall, died next. Her body was found in the graveyard, displayed on a burial slab. There were others before Susanna, women whose names are lost, but whose deaths followed the same pattern. The killer takes them at night. He kills them in ways that require time and privacy, and he leaves them somewhere they will be found, ensuring the city knows he is still active. The guards have given him a name, the Butcher. The name is apt because of how he treats the bodies, but it also reveals something about how Windhelm views the murders. A butcher is someone who processes meat, who has technical knowledge of how to disassemble a carcass efficiently. The name suggests the guards recognize that this killer has specific skills, that his mutilations are not random violence but practice technique. He knows where to cut. He knows what tools to use. He knows how to work quickly enough to complete his ritual and disappear before anyone finds him. When you encounter the murder of Susanna the Wicked, you find her body surrounded by witnesses who saw nothing useful. Calixto Corium, who runs the House of Curiosities Museum, was nearby but only glimpsed the killer from behind. Silda the Unseen, a homeless woman, heard screaming but arrived too late. Helgerd, the priestess who maintains the Hall of the Dead, examines the body and notes that Susanna's coin purse is intact, eliminating robbery as a motive. The guard investigating the scene is overwhelmed, understaffed, and willing to accept help from anyone competent enough to follow a blood trail. The blood trail leads from the graveyard to Yerim, the house where Frigga Shattershield was killed. The trail is not subtle. It is a clear path of blood droplets leading directly to a specific location, suggesting the killer either did not care about being tracked or wanted someone to find what he left in that house. The front door is locked with a master-level lock, difficult but not impossible to bypass. Inside you find evidence that transforms the investigation from procedural to deeply disturbing. Yerim has been converted into a workshop. The main room contains pamphlets warning about the butcher, scattered around as though the killer was reading his own press coverage. The butcher's journals are here, documenting his thoughts in fragmented entries that reveal obsession but not clear motive. And in a hidden room behind a false panel in a wardrobe, you find the altar. The hidden room is where the butcher performs whatever ritual he believes he is conducting. The altar is covered in blood and remains. Embalming tools are arranged precisely, the kind of instruments used by someone like Helgerd to prepare bodies for burial. These tools are specialized, designed for specific anatomical purposes, and their presence confirms what the guard suspected. The butcher has technical knowledge, possibly professional training in handling the dead. The room also contains more journals, more pamphlets, and a strange amulet that Calixto has identified to anyone who asked as a wheelstone. A harmless collector's item. It is not. Wundfirth will later confirm what it actually represents. An artifact with necromantic properties. connected directly to the murders. The evidence points in multiple directions. The amulet suggests the court mage Windhelm the Unliving might be involved, as he would have access to and knowledge of necromantic artifacts. The journals contain cryptic references that could be interpreted as confessions or as the ravings of someone documenting a separate investigation. The pamphlets were printed by Viola Giordano, a paranoid woman who has been trying to convince anyone who will listen that there is a serial killer in Windhelm. She is correct, but her methods are so aggressive that most citizens dismiss her as a conspiracy theorist. If you follow the wrong thread of evidence, you can have Windhelm arrested. The court mage will protest his innocence, but the circumstantial case is strong enough that the steward, your life, will imprison him. And then a few days later, another woman is killed in exactly the same manner as the previous victims. The butcher is still active, which means Windhelm is innocent, which means you arrested the wrong person while the actual killer continued operating. If you speak to Windhelm first, either before or after his arrest, he reveals that he has been conducting his own investigation into the murders. He has been studying the pattern, trying to predict when and where the butcher will strike next. His research suggests the killer operates on a schedule tied to specific locations in the Stone Quarter. Windhelm's investigation is methodical and informed by genuine magical expertise, but his reputation as a dark mage makes him an easy suspect in a city already nervous about necromancy and death. The actual killer is Calixto Corium, the man who runs the House of Curiosities. He was one of the witnesses at Susanna's murder. He offers to buy the strange amulet if you bring it to him. He presents himself as a helpful scholar and collector, someone interested in Windhelm's history and eager to assist with the investigation. His public persona is carefully constructed to deflect suspicion. He is eccentric but seemingly harmless, an antiquarian who surrounds himself with historical oddities and obscure artifacts. The truth is revealed when you follow Windhelm's predictions and patrol the Stone Quarter at night. Calixto emerges from the shadows and approaches a woman. He identifies himself as the butcher and draws a knife. The guards do not react. They are either too far away to intervene, or simply do not recognize what is happening until it is too late. You have seconds to stop him before he kills his next victim. If you succeed in stopping him, Calixto flees back to Skyrim. If you fail, he kills the woman and escapes to his house anyway. Either way, the confrontation ends in Skyrim, in the hidden room where he has been conducting his work. When you kill him and search his body, you find the necromancer's amulet and a key to a locked bookcase in the House of Curiosities. The bookcase contains more of his journals, and these finally reveal his motive. Calixto had a sister. Her name is never recorded. She died at some point before the murders began, and Calixto could not accept her death. He became obsessed with finding a way to bring her back. His museum, filled with artifacts and oddities from across Skyrim's history, was not just a business. It was a resource for his research into resurrection magic. He collected the necromancer's amulet specifically for its power related to reanimation, and he began killing women who resembled his sister, taking parts from them in a grotesque attempt to reconstruct her through necromantic ritual. The murders were not random acts of violence. They were components of a resurrection spell. Calixto believed that if he could gather enough pieces from enough victims, if he could perform the right rituals with the right tools in the right conditions, he could bring his sister back. Each woman he killed was reduced to raw material for a magical working that had no chance of succeeding in the way he envisioned. He was not insane in the sense of being detached from reality. He understood he was killing people. He simply believed the end justified the means, that bringing his sister back was worth any number of deaths. This transforms the nature of the horror. Calixto is not a monster who kills because he enjoys it. He is a man who loved his sister so much that he convinced himself murder was an acceptable tool for reversing her death. His grief metastasized into obsession, and his obsession metastasized into serial murder. He built an entire framework of justification around actions he knew were wrong, telling himself that the women he killed were less important than the sister he wanted to save. The hidden room in Skyrim was his workshop, but it was also his shrine. He kept the amulet there. He kept his journals documenting his progress and setbacks. He kept the tools arranged in specific patterns, treating the murder and dissection of human beings as a technical problem requiring proper equipment and methodology. The room represents the complete industrialization of grief, the transformation of love into a process that requires human sacrifice to function. What makes Calixto particularly disturbing is how close he came to being caught earlier and how easily he deflected suspicion. He was at Susanna's murder scene and offered himself as a witness. He positioned himself as someone interested in helping solve the crimes while simultaneously committing them. When you brought him the amulet for identification, he did not panic. He calmly offered to buy it, removing evidence from the investigation while maintaining his cover. He gave you a tour of his museum if you asked for one, showing you historical artifacts and obscure curiosities, while his sister's reconstructed body was hidden in the house next door. His ability to function normally in society while actively killing people speaks to a specific type of compartmentalization. Calixto did not withdraw from Windhelm society. He did not become a recluse. He maintained his business. He interacted with customers. He participated in the community. And at night, he hunted women who matched his sister's appearance, killed them with embalming tools, and harvested what he needed before disposing of the bodies in public locations where they would be found. The public disposal is significant. Calixto did not hide the bodies. He displayed them. Frigga was left in her own home. Susanna was placed on a burial slab in the graveyard. The display served multiple purposes. It created fear, which kept women off the streets at night, making it easier for him to isolate future targets. It demonstrated his control, showing that he could kill in a heavily populated city and escape without being caught. And it may have served some ritual purpose, some belief that the display itself was part of the magic he was attempting to work. The guard's failure to stop him earlier is understandable, given the context, but still damning. Windhelm is a city divided by civil war, occupied with larger political concerns that make individual murders seem less urgent. The Jarl is focused on rebellion against the Empire. The guards are stretched thin trying to maintain order in a city where racial tensions run high and every citizen might be a spy. In this environment, a serial killer can operate for months or years before anyone with authority dedicates serious resources to stopping him. The investigation also reveals how easily the wrong person can be blamed when evidence is ambiguous. Windhelm the Unliving is the court mage, which means he practices magic that many Nords view with suspicion. His title literally includes the Unliving, which suggests some past association with necromancy or undeath. When evidence of necromantic activity appears, Windhelm is the obvious suspect. The actual killer, a merchant who runs a legitimate business and presents as a helpful citizen, is able to hide behind his public respectability while Windhelm is imprisoned for crimes he did not commit. This speaks to a larger pattern in Windhelm and in Skyrim generally, the assumption that danger comes from obvious outsiders rather than integrated insiders. The guards are willing to arrest a court mage on circumstantial evidence, but do not seriously investigate the merchant who was conveniently present at a murder scene. The bias is not necessarily malicious. It is the natural human tendency to trust people who seem normal, and suspect people who seem strange. Calixto understood this and exploited it ruthlessly. After Calixto is killed, and his journals are read, the full scope of his plan becomes clear. He was not going to stop at 3 or 4 victims. He believed he needed more components, more pieces, more attempts before the ritual would succeed. Each murder was both an experiment and a harvest. He documented what worked and what did not. He refined his technique. He was treating resurrection as an engineering problem that would yield to persistent iteration. The horror is not that he failed to bring his sister back. The horror is that he might have succeeded in creating something. Necromancy in the Elder Scrolls universe can produce functional results. Corpses can be reanimated, souls can be bound to bodies. The magic is real and it works, although not always in the way the practitioner intends. If Calixto had continued his work, if he had killed enough women and harvested enough material, he might have created something that walked and breathed and responded to his sister's name. But it would not have been her. It would have been an abomination constructed from murder, held together by magic that was never meant to reverse death. You stop him before he completes whatever he was building. The women of Windhelm are safe again. Yharem can be purchased and renovated, the hidden rooms sealed, the bloodstains scrubbed away. But the house will always be the place where a man tried to kill his way back to a sister he could not let go. The altar can be removed, but the purpose it served cannot be erased. Every stone in that house carries the memory of what Calixto did there. And this is where the invisible horror becomes visible. You did not witness the Dwemer disappear. You did not watch the Falmer descend into blindness and slavery. Those are ancient tragedies you can only understand through ruins and the creatures that inhabit them, but you can stop Calixto Corium. You can stand in his hidden room and see the tools he used. You can read his journals and understand exactly what he was trying to accomplish. You can save the woman he was about to kill, see the knife in his hand, hear him identify himself as the butcher before you cut him down. The immediacy makes it worse in some ways. The Dwemer and the Falmer are historical horrors, separated from you by thousands of years, and cultural extinction. Calixto is contemporary. He walks the same streets you walk. He breathes the same air. He is human in a way that makes his actions more comprehensible, and therefore more disturbing. You can imagine loving someone so much that their death becomes unbearable. You can imagine grief so intense that it demands action. And then you watch what happens when that grief is channeled into systematic murder, and you understand that love can be twisted into something monstrous without losing its essential nature as love. Calixto did not hate his victims. He needed them. They were resources for a goal he believed was righteous. This is worse than sadistic killing. A sadist at least acknowledges that what they are doing is harmful. Calixto had convinced himself that his murders served a higher purpose, that the women were unfortunate but necessary casualties in his quest to undo death. He had created an entire moral framework that justified atrocity, and he lived inside that framework so completely that he could stand at a crime scene and pretend to help investigate crimes he himself had committed. When you kill him, you end the immediate threat, but you cannot end what he represents. Somewhere else in Skyrim, someone else is grieving. Someone else cannot accept a death that occurred. Someone else is willing to consider any method, no matter how dark, if it offers even a slim possibility of bringing back what was lost. Calixto is not unique. He is just the one who acted on impulses that other people managed to restrain. The guards thank you for stopping the butcher. Yorleif, the steward, acknowledges your service to the city. If you arrested Windhelm by mistake, he is released with apologies. Windhelm returns to its normal state of dysfunction, dealing with the civil war and racial tensions and the dozen other problems that plague the city. The murders stop, life continues, and in the Hall of the Dead, Helgerd prepares Calixto's body for burial using the same embalming tools he stole to murder women. This creates a grotesque symmetry. The tools return to their proper use. The body of the killer is processed with the instruments he perverted. And Helgerd, who noted that Susanna's coin purse was intact and helped identify the tools used in the murders, performs her professional duties without comment or ceremony. Death is her job. She handles it with the same calm efficiency, whether the body belongs to a victim or a killer. The case of the Windhelm Butcher demonstrates something essential about horror in Skyrim. The monsters are not always the creatures in dungeons. Sometimes they are the merchants in cities. Sometimes they operate in plain sight, hiding behind legitimacy and social integration. Sometimes they are motivated by comprehensible emotions taken to incomprehensible extremes. And sometimes you can stop them, but only after they have already destroyed multiple lives in pursuit of the one life they wanted to restore. But what happens when the horror is not a lone killer? When it is not something you can stop by confronting a single person? What happens when the nightmare is built into a system? When it is the price of power that was paid generations ago and continues to extract payment from everyone who was foolish enough to make the bargain? Chapter 4: The Oath That Never Expires. Stand outside Riften at night and look northwest toward the mountains. Somewhere in those hills, hidden behind illusions and locked doors that only activate for specific people, is Nightingale Hall. Inside that hall, 3 suits of armor wait on pedestals. The armor is black, designed to blend into shadows, blessed by a Daedric prince who does not require worship but demands service. The armor will fit anyone who takes the oath, changing size and shape to accommodate whoever claims the title. And once you put it on, once you speak the words that bind you to Nocturnal, you belong to her until she decides otherwise. The Nightingales are a secret organization within the Thieves Guild. Though most guild members believe they are just a legend used to scare new recruits into obedience, the reality is more complicated. The Nightingales exist. They always come in groups of 3, and they serve Nocturnal, the Daedric Prince of Night, Darkness, and Mystery, in exchange for abilities that make them supernaturally effective thieves. The arrangement is transactional. Nocturnal does not want prayers or temples. She does not require devotion or love. She wants guards for the Twilight Sepulchre, a temple in Skyrim that houses a portal to her realm called the Evergloam. That portal is kept open by an artifact called the Skeleton Key, and when the key is in place, Nocturnal's influence flows into Tamriel, providing subtle luck to thieves across the continent. In exchange for protecting this setup, the Nightingales receive powers related to stealth, subterfuge, and darkness. They can turn invisible while sneaking. They can drain life from targets. They can make enemies attack each other. The powers are significant enough to justify the cost, assuming you understand what the cost actually entails. The cost is eternal service. When you die, you do not go to Sovngarde or the Dreams Leave or wherever your soul would normally go. You go to the Evergloam. You become a Nightingale Sentinel, a spectral guardian who patrols the Twilight Sepulchre forever, defending it from threats even in death. This is not metaphorical. The previous Nightingale Trinity included a man named Gallus Desidenius, who was the guild master of the Thieves Guild before he was murdered by another Nightingale named Mercer Frey. When you enter the Twilight Sepulchre during the questline, Gallus is there as a sentinel, still performing his duties despite being dead. Gallus is not happy about this. He does not appear grateful for eternal purpose. He is fulfilling a contract he agreed to when he was alive, and now that he is dead, the contract continues to bind him. He helps you because you are trying to stop Mercer Frey, the Nightingale who betrayed the oath, but his assistance comes with warnings. He makes it clear that what you are considering, joining the Nightingales yourself, is a permanent decision with consequences that extend beyond your mortal life. The most recent Nightingale Trinity before your involvement consisted of 3 people: Gallus, Mercer Frey, and Carlia. Gallus was the guildmaster, a capable thief who took the oath seriously. Carlia was devoted to both the guild and to Nocturnal, believing that the arrangement benefited everyone involved. Mercer Frey was ambitious, competent, and willing to betray anything if it served his interests. At some point, Mercer discovered that the skeleton key was not just an unbreakable lockpick. The key's true function is to unlock potential, to open possibilities, to access things that would normally be closed. In the hands of someone who understands what unlocking can mean in abstract terms, the skeleton key becomes a reality-altering tool. Mercer stole the key from the Twilight Sepulchre, breaking his oath to Nocturnal and severing the connection between her realm and Tamriel. When the key was stolen, Nocturnal's influence stopped flowing through the Ebonmere portal. The luck that thieves had relied on for generations dried up. The Thieves Guild, which had been one of the most successful criminal organizations in Skyrim, began failing. Jobs went wrong, members were caught, influence evaporated. The guild declined from a powerful network with operations across multiple cities to a desperate group operating out of the sewers beneath Riften, unable to understand why everything they attempted resulted in failure. Mercer covered his crime by framing Carlia. He murdered Gallus and made it appear that Carlia had killed him. Carlia fled, becoming a fugitive hunted by the very guild she had served. Mercer took over as guildmaster and used the skeleton key for 25 years, enriching himself while the guild collapsed around him. He did not care that his theft was destroying the organization. He had what he wanted, and the cost was being paid by people who did not know why their luck had abandoned them. The skeleton key allowed Mercer to access the guild's vault without requiring the two keys that normally opened it. He embezzled enormous sums, slowly draining the guild's resources while maintaining the fiction that external factors were causing their decline. He blamed bad luck, poor planning, incompetent members, anything except his own theft of the artifact that provided the guild's luck in the first place. And because nobody knew about the Nightingales, because the connection between the guild and Nocturnal was secret, nobody could identify the actual cause of their problems. Carlia spent 25 years as a fugitive, trying to find proof that Mercer had killed Gallus and stolen the key. She lived in the wilderness, avoided civilization, and slowly gathered evidence that Mercer could not explain away. When she finally made contact with the Thieves Guild again, she did so through you, using you as a proxy to deliver her evidence to Brynjolf, one of the few guild members competent enough to understand what she was presenting. The evidence is Gallus's journal, written in a code that only Nightingales can read. The journal documents Mercer's theft and Gallus's investigation into what Mercer was planning. It proves that Carlia did not murder Gallus, that Mercer betrayed the oath, and that the guild's decline is directly connected to Mercer's crime. But the journal also reveals the existence of the Nightingales, the oath, and the arrangement with Nocturnal. Reading it forces Brynjolf to confront the fact that the guild's success was never purely the result of their own skill. They had supernatural backing, and that backing was withdrawn when Mercer broke the contract. Carlia brings you and Brynjolf to Nightingale Hall and explains the full situation. She admits that she failed to protect the Twilight Sepulchre, that her failure allowed Mercer to steal the key, and that her inability to prove his guilt meant the guild suffered for decades without understanding why. She offers you and Brynjolf the chance to become Nightingales, to replace the broken Trinity, and to have Nocturnal support in hunting down Mercer and recovering the key. The offer is presented as urgent. Mercer knows that Carlia has made contact with the guild. He knows his crime will be exposed. He is preparing to flee Skyrim with everything he has stolen, abandoning the guild to its fate. If you want to stop him, if you want to restore the guild's luck, you need power that only Nocturnal can provide. And the price for that power is the oath. Brynjolf hesitates. He is not religious. He does not worship Daedric princes. The idea of selling his soul, even for a good cause, troubles him. But Carlia frames it as a business transaction. Nocturnal is not asking for worship. She is offering an exchange, service for power. both in life and in death. You guard her temple. She gives you abilities. It is a contract, nothing more. This framing is important because it highlights how Nocturnal operates differently from other Daedric princes. Molag Bal demands domination and cruelty. Mehrunes Dagon wants destruction. Hermaeus Mora collects forbidden knowledge. Nocturnal wants guards for a specific location and does not care what you do with her gifts as long as you fulfill your end of the bargain. She is transactional in a way that makes the oath seem almost reasonable, but the reasonableness is deceptive. The oath is permanent. There is no clause that allows you to quit. There is no retirement. There is no escape after a certain period of service. You are bound to Nocturnal until she releases you, and based on every documented case, she never releases anyone. Gallus served faithfully and was murdered for it, and his reward is eternal service as a sentinel. This is not punishment. This is the deal working as intended. When you take the oath, Carlia summons Nocturnal. The Daedric prince appears and acknowledges the arrangement. She accepts you and Brynjolf as new Nightingales. She restores Carlia to her position after Carlia's apology for failing to prevent the theft, and then Nocturnal makes the terms explicit. You are hers. In life, you use your abilities as you see fit, but the sepulchre must be protected. In death, you serve as sentinels. The bargain is struck, and there is no indication that you had any real choice about accepting it if you wanted to continue the quest line. This reveals something crucial about how power works in Skyrim. You can gain abilities through training and practice, developing skills over time through effort. Or you can make deals with forces that grant power immediately in exchange for permanent obligations. The second option is faster and more effective, but it comes with costs that may not be apparent until long after the deal is finalized. Nocturnal does not hide the terms. She tells you explicitly what you are agreeing to, but the urgency of stopping Mercer and the promise of supernatural abilities make it easy to accept without fully considering what eternal service actually means. After the oath is struck, you hunt Mercer Frey to Erkingthand, a massive Dwemer ruin in the far north of Skyrim. Mercer has broken into the ruin and is attempting to access the eyes of the Falmer, two gems that he believes will fund his escape from Skyrim. The eyes are ancient snow elf artifacts, possibly religious in nature, that survived the Nordic genocide and the Dwemer enslavement. They ended up in Erkingthand, mounted in a statue, and Mercer intends to steal them regardless of their cultural or historical significance. The confrontation with Mercer occurs beneath the statue. He is empowered by the skeleton key, which has unlocked abilities in him that go beyond simple thievery. He can turn invisible. He can corrupt the stone around him. He can fight effectively against multiple opponents while taunting them about their futility. The skeleton key has made him powerful enough that without Nocturnal's blessing, you would not be able to match him. You kill Mercer Frey beneath the statue. As he dies, the eyes of the Falmer fall from where he was attempting to pry them loose. You recover the skeleton key from his body, and then Erkingthand begins to collapse. Flooded by water from the underground lake the ruin was built above. You escape barely, leaving Mercer's body to be crushed by the falling ruins and drowned in the dark water. The recovery of the skeleton key should be the end of the Nightingale quest, but it is actually the beginning of your obligation. You return the key to the Twilight Sepulchre, restore the Ebonmere portal, and re-establish Nocturnal's connection to Tamriel. The Thieves Guild's luck immediately begins to improve. Jobs start succeeding. Influence returns. The guild rebuilds rapidly, returning to prominence across Skyrim. Everything Mercer destroyed is restored because the supernatural backing has returned, and you are now bound forever to maintain that backing. As long as the skeleton key remains in the sepulchre, as long as the Ebonmere stays open, as long as Nocturnal's influence flows into Tamriel, you are obligated to guard it. not just in life, in death as well. When you die, whenever and however that occurs, you will become a sentinel like Gallus. You will patrol the sepulchre for eternity, defending it against thieves and intruders, unable to rest or move on to whatever afterlife you might have earned through your other actions. Nocturnal even acknowledges that your service was expected. When you return the key, she does not thank you effusively. She notes that you fulfilled your agreement, that you performed your duties as required. This is not generosity or gratitude. This is a contract being honored. You did what you agreed to do, and she is providing what she agreed to provide. The transactional nature of the relationship is maintained precisely. The horror here is subtle because it is consensual. You chose to take the oath. Carlia explained the terms. Nocturnal was explicit about the requirements. You knew what you were agreeing to when you spoke the words. And yet, the full weight of the decision may not become apparent until years or decades later, when you are old and realize that death will not bring rest, that you have traded eternal peace for supernatural power and the prosperity of an organization of thieves. The Nightingale armor sits in its case in Nightingale Hall. You can wear it whenever you want. It enhances your abilities as a thief, making you better at everything the guild requires. You can call on Nocturnal's agents once per day, using her power to turn invisible or drain life or cause chaos. These abilities make you more effective at your profession. They give you advantages that non-Nightingales cannot access, and every time you use them, you are reminded that you are not just a thief anymore. You are an agent of a Daedric prince, bound by an oath that will never expire. Gallus understood this. His journal contains reflections on what it means to be a Nightingale, what the oath costs, and why someone might choose to accept it anyway. He did not regret becoming a Nightingale, but he was clear-eyed about what he had given up. His death did not end his obligations. It transformed them into a different form of service, one that continues indefinitely. The Thieves Guild benefits immensely from this arrangement. Their success is directly tied to Nocturnal's favor. When the connection is strong, they thrive. When it is severed, they collapse. This creates a dependency that the guild does not fully understand. Most members do not know about the Nightingales. They do not know that their luck is supernatural. They believe they are succeeding through their own skill, unaware that they are being carried by a Daedric prince's influence. This dependence makes the guild vulnerable. If the Nightingales fail, if the sepulchre is breached, if the skeleton key is stolen again, the entire organization suffers. Their prosperity is contingent on a secret contract that most of them know nothing about, maintained by 3 people who have sold their souls to ensure the guild continues to prosper. And here is where the invisible horror becomes clear. The Nightingales are not victims. They chose their fate, but they chose it in moments of crisis, when alternatives seemed impossible, when the promise of power outweighed the cost of eternal service. Carlia chose because she wanted to serve Nocturnal and protect the guild. Gallus chose for reasons his journal does not fully explain, but suggests involved dedication to both the guild and the oath itself. Mercer chose and then betrayed his choice, proving that even willing participants can reject the bargain if they decide the power is worth more than the obligation. You choose because stopping Mercer requires Nocturnal's help, because restoring the guild requires returning the key, because Carlia needs new Nightingales to replace the broken Trinity. The choice makes sense in context. It solves immediate problems, and it binds you to a Daedric prince forever, ensuring that when you die, you will continue serving in a spectral form that guards a temple in darkness until Nocturnal decides otherwise. The oath never expires. The service never ends. The price is paid in a single moment and then collected across eternity. And somewhere in the Evergloam, Nocturnal watches her sentinels patrol, satisfied that the transaction continues to function exactly as designed. Chapter 5. The Family That Demands Your Death. There is a phrase that the Dark Brotherhood uses when they want someone to understand what membership actually means. They call it the 5 tenets. These are not suggestions or guidelines. They are absolute rules, violation of which results in execution by your own family. The first tenet is simple: never dishonor the Night Mother. The second, never betray the Dark Brotherhood or its secrets. The third, never disobey or refuse to carry out an order from a Dark Brotherhood superior. The fourth, never steal the possessions of a Dark Brother or Dark Sister. The fifth, never kill a Dark Brother or Dark Sister. These tenets exist because the Dark Brotherhood is not a guild of assassins who happen to work together. It is a religious organization devoted to Sithis, the Dread Father, the embodiment of void and chaos, and the Night Mother, a corpse that has been preserved for thousands of years, serves as the conduit through which Sithis communicates contracts to the Brotherhood. When you join the Dark Brotherhood, you are not just becoming an assassin. You are entering a family that worships death itself and considers murder a sacrament. The Night Mother's body is kept in a coffin. The coffin is transported between sanctuaries, moved whenever the Brotherhood needs to relocate. Inside that coffin is the preserved corpse of a woman who died in the Second Era, possibly earlier. Her body does not decay. Her presence radiates cold. And when the listener, one member of the Brotherhood who can hear her voice, climbs into the coffin with her corpse, she speaks. She whispers the names of targets, the locations where they can be found, and the clients who want them dead. This is how contracts enter the Brotherhood. Not through negotiations or written agreements, but through a dead woman whispering to someone lying next to her corpse in darkness. The current listener is the last one. The previous listener died, and the position remained vacant for years because nobody else could hear the Night Mother's voice. The sanctuaries across Tamriel began operating independently, taking contracts through intermediary systems instead of receiving them directly from the Night Mother. The Skyrim sanctuary, located near Falkreath, had been reduced to a handful of members led by Astrid, a woman who rejected the old traditions and believed the Brotherhood should modernize. Astrid did not want a listener. She did not want the Night Mother's corpse in her sanctuary. She wanted the Brotherhood to function as a business, taking contracts for gold rather than treating murder as religious devotion. This put her in conflict with the old ways, with the traditions that had sustained the Brotherhood for thousands of years, and with the Night Mother herself. When you are abducted by the Dark Brotherhood, you wake up in an abandoned shack with Astrid standing over you. She has 3 people bound and gagged in the room. She explains that someone performed the Black Sacrament, a ritual used to contact the Dark Brotherhood when you want someone killed. The ritual requires specific components: a human heart, flesh, bones, and a skull arranged in a summoning circle while the petitioner chants prayers to the Night Mother. Someone performed this ritual, and the contract came to Astrid, but she does not know which of the 3 captives is the intended target. So she tells you to kill one of them, anyone. It does not matter to her which one dies, as long as someone dies. This is your initiation. Astrid is testing whether you are capable of murder, whether you will kill a stranger on the word of someone you just met, whether you possess the fundamental detachment required to function as an assassin. The choice she offers is false freedom. You can choose who dies, but you cannot choose whether someone dies. That decision has already been made. If you kill all 3, Astrid is pleased. If you kill just one, she accepts it. If you refuse to kill anyone and instead kill Astrid, the quest line branches into destroying the Brotherhood rather than joining it. But assuming you kill at least one captive, Astrid welcomes you into the family and brings you to the sanctuary. The Falkreath sanctuary is hidden in a cave system, accessible through a black door that asks a riddle: what is the music of life? The answer is, silence, my brother, a phrase that reveals the Brotherhood's understanding of their work. Death is silence. Murder is the end of noise, of voice, of presence. The music of life is its cessation, and the Brotherhood are musicians performing that silence across Skyrim. Inside the sanctuary, you meet the family. Nazir, a Redguard assassin who handles contracts with professional efficiency. Babette, a child vampire who has been 10 years old for 300 years and uses her appearance to access targets who would never suspect a little girl. Festus Krex, an elderly mage who specializes in poison and decay magic. Arnbjorn, a werewolf and Astrid's husband who kills with claws when the job allows it. Vizara, an Argonian who joined the Brotherhood to escape a worse fate. Gabriella, a Dunmer who treats assassination as art. And Cicero, a jester who serves as the keeper of the Night Mother, transporting her coffin and maintaining the old traditions that Astrid wants to abandon. Cicero is mad. His journals document a slow descent into insanity caused by decades of traveling with the Night Mother's corpse, hearing her voice when nobody else could, serving as keeper when no listener existed to hear her messages. He arrived at the Falkreath sanctuary with the Night Mother's coffin, demanding entry and respect for the old ways. Astrid allowed him in, because she feared what would happen if she rejected the Night Mother completely, but she made it clear that Cicero's presence was tolerated, not welcomed. The tension between Astrid's modernization and Cicero's devotion to tradition creates fractures in the family. Astrid wants control. She wants the Brotherhood to answer to her, not to a corpse that whispers contracts to a listener who may or may not exist. Cicero wants the Brotherhood to return to its sacred purpose, to treat murder as worship rather than business, and you are caught between them, performing contracts while the family slowly tears itself apart. The contracts start small. Nazir gives you 3 names. A mentally ill beggar in Iverstead named Narfi, a mine owner in Dawnstar named Baytild, a paranoid recluse who lives in the wilderness near a mill. These are not evil people doing evil things. They are simply people whose names ended up on a list. And the Brotherhood wants to know whether you will kill strangers for gold without asking why. But the contracts escalate. You are sent to kill Vittoria Vici at her wedding in solitude. Vittoria is the cousin of the Emperor, and her wedding is a public event attended by hundreds of citizens. The contract specifies that her death must occur during the ceremony in front of witnesses to send a message. You can drop a statue on her. You can shoot her with a bow. You can use magic. The method is your choice, but the public nature of the murder is mandatory. This crosses a line from selective assassination into political terrorism. Vittoria is not evil. She is not a target who deserves death by any moral standard except the fact that someone paid to have her killed. Her death is meant to terrify solitude, to demonstrate that even the Emperor's family is not safe, to create chaos that serves whoever ordered the contract. And you perform it because that is what the family requires. After Vittoria's murder, the contracts become explicitly political. You kill a military commander. You destroy the Emperor's security detail. You infiltrate Castle Dower in solitude disguised as a gourmet chef and poison the Emperor's meal. But the man who dies is a body double. The real Emperor is waiting on his ship, the Kataria, moored in the water just outside the city. And that is where you go to finish the work. Every step brings you closer to a single goal: assassinating the Emperor of Tamriel on behalf of a client whose identity has not been revealed. The Emperor, Titus Mede II, knows he is a target. His intelligence network has warned him that the Dark Brotherhood has been contracted to kill him. He accepts this as an occupational hazard of being Emperor, as something that comes with the position. When you finally confront him on his ship, he does not beg for his life. He does not try to bribe you. He accepts his death with dignity and makes a single request: find out who ordered the contract and kill them. This request reveals something essential about the Dark Brotherhood. They are tools. Whoever pays the contract gets the kill. The Brotherhood does not investigate whether targets deserve death. They do not refuse contracts based on moral considerations. They are absolute mercenaries operating under religious justification, and that combination makes them more dangerous than simple murderers. A murderer might hesitate. The Brotherhood does not hesitate because hesitation violates the tenets. You kill the Emperor. You return to Astrid expecting payment, and instead you find the sanctuary on fire, the family being slaughtered by Penitus Oculatus agents, and Astrid burned and dying in the room where the Night Mother's coffin is kept. She confesses that she betrayed the family to the Empire, that she gave them the sanctuary's location in exchange for gold and amnesty. She thought she could save herself by sacrificing everyone else, but the Empire betrayed her in turn, burning her and leaving her to die slowly while they hunted down the remaining Brotherhood members. Astrid's betrayal violates multiple tenets. She dishonored the Night Mother by rejecting the old ways. She betrayed the Brotherhood's secrets to their enemies. She effectively killed her family by giving the Empire the information needed to destroy them. By the laws of the organization she led, Astrid has earned execution multiple times over, but she is already dying, so she performs the Black Sacrament on herself, contracting the Brotherhood to kill her and end her suffering. You perform the contract. You kill Astrid, and then the Night Mother speaks to you directly for the first time, naming you the new listener. The voice comes from the coffin, from the preserved corpse that has been silent to everyone except Cicero for decades. She tells you to climb into the coffin with her. When you do, she gives you instructions for rebuilding the Brotherhood and continuing its sacred work. The Night Mother's voice is not warm or comforting. It is the whisper of something that should not be able to speak, that should have decayed centuries ago, but persists through mechanisms that have nothing to do with life. She treats you as a tool, just as the Brotherhood treats its targets as contracts. You're useful to her because you can hear her voice. You can receive contracts directly from Sithis through her corpse. You can restore the Brotherhood to what it was before Astrid tried to modernize it. Cicero, assuming he survives the quest line, becomes your companion. The mad jester who traveled with a corpse for decades is now your ally, helping rebuild the Brotherhood and establish a new sanctuary. His madness makes more sense when you understand that he spent years hearing the Night Mother's voice with nobody to share that burden. He was the only person keeping the old traditions alive, and the isolation drove him to the edge of sanity and possibly beyond it. The new sanctuary is hidden in Dawnstar, in an old converted mine. You recruit new members. You train them in the tenets. You receive contracts from the Night Mother and distribute them to the family. The Brotherhood begins growing again, reconstituting itself around you as the listener, and every contract you complete, every life you take, is an act of worship to Sithis, the void that demands death and receives it through the blade of his followers. This is the horror of the Dark Brotherhood. It is not a necessary evil. It is not a guild of assassins who kill bad people. It is a religious cult that worships entropy and treats murder as sacrament. The Night Mother is not a deity. She is a corpse that serves as a telephone line to something worse, something that wants people dead not for justice or revenge or political gain, but because death is its nature and its purpose. The tenets exist to maintain the Brotherhood's function. They prevent internal conflict by making murder of other members absolutely forbidden. They prevent betrayal by making it a capital crime. They enforce obedience by making disobedience executable. The tenets are not moral guidelines. They are operational procedures designed to keep a murder cult functioning efficiently across centuries. And you, as the listener, are now responsible for maintaining those procedures. You are the voice of the Night Mother. You are the conduit through which Sithis sends his contracts into the world. You climb into a coffin with a corpse and listen to it whisper names. and then you send your family to kill those people, and the cycle continues as it has continued for thousands of years. The Brotherhood does not ask whether targets deserve death. They do not investigate innocence or guilt. They receive contracts. They fulfill contracts. They collect payment. The moral weight of each death is irrelevant to the organization. What matters is that the tenets are followed, that the family remains cohesive, that the Night Mother is honored, and that Sithis receives his due. You can rationalize this as necessary work in a world that needs killers for hire. You can tell yourself that most targets probably deserve death for reasons you do not know. You can focus on the contracts that eliminate genuinely evil people and ignore the ones that kill innocents. But the rationalization only works if you refuse to look directly at what the Brotherhood actually is: a murder cult that has industrialized assassination and sanctified it as worship. The Night Mother's corpse does not care about your rationalizations. She gives you contracts. You fulfill them. The family grows. The Brotherhood prospers. And somewhere in the void, Sithis is satisfied that death continues to be delivered with religious devotion by people who have convinced themselves that murder is holy. The parallel to the Nightingales is deliberate. Both organizations require oaths that bind you beyond death. Both serve supernatural powers that operate through transactional relationships. Both grant abilities in exchange for eternal service. But where the Nightingales guard a temple and protect a portal, the Dark Brotherhood spreads death across Skyrim in worship of entropy itself. You can walk away from the Brotherhood. You can refuse to join when Astrid offers. You can kill Astrid in that shack and then wipe out the sanctuary, destroying the organization before it can destroy more lives. But if you join, if you take the contracts, if you listen to the Night Mother's whispers in darkness, you become part of a machine that has been killing people for thousands of years and will continue killing people for thousands more. The sanctuary in Dawnstar is your responsibility now. The family looks to you for contracts. The Night Mother whispers to you in the coffin, and every name she gives you is another person who will die because someone performed the Black Sacrament and asked for death to be delivered. This is not horror that happened long ago like the Dwemer disappearance. This is not horror that concluded like Calixto's murders. This is ongoing, active horror that you are personally participating in every time you accept a contract. The invisibility is that nobody outside the Brotherhood knows who you are. Nobody recognizes you as the listener. You walk through cities having killed dozens of people at the whispered request of a corpse, and the guards do not arrest you because they do not know. The true weight of the Dark Brotherhood becomes clear when you realize that the organization is immortal. Individual members die. Sanctuaries are destroyed. Listeners are killed. But the Brotherhood persists because the Night Mother persists. Because Sithis persists. Because there will always be people willing to perform the Black Sacrament when they want someone dead. The organization regenerates across centuries, adapting to new eras while maintaining its core function, delivering death to whoever pays the price. And now you are the mechanism through which that delivery occurs, the Night Mother whispers. You listen. The family kills. Sithis is satisfied. The cycle repeats. And somewhere in Skyrim, someone is mixing bone and flesh and heart and skull, preparing to perform the Black Sacrament, creating a contract that will eventually reach your ears as a whisper from a corpse in darkness. The Dwemer vanished and left questions. The Falmer were transformed and cannot escape what they became. Calixto killed to reverse death and created only more death. The Nightingales serve Nocturnal forever in exchange for power, and the Dark Brotherhood worships death itself, treating murder as prayer, operating across centuries as a family that kills together and dies together, and recruits new members to continue the work. But there is something worse than organizations that demand your eternal service. There is something more disturbing than cults that worship entropy or thieves who sell their souls, because at least those horrors have structures, traditions, reasons that can be understood even if they cannot be accepted. What happens when the horror has no structure? When it is simply hunger that has been given permission to consume anything it touches? When the invisible becomes visible only when it is too late to escape? Chapter 6. The Feast That Never Satisfies. The Hall of the Dead in Markarth has a priest named Brother Verulus. He is devoted to Arche, the god of life and death, and he takes his duties seriously. One of those duties is maintaining the sanctity of the dead, ensuring that bodies are treated with respect and that the boundary between life and death is honored. When bodies start disappearing from the Hall of the Dead, Brother Verulus is disturbed but confused. The missing remains are old, some of them decades old. There is no apparent pattern to which bodies are taken, and there is no evidence of who is taking them. What Brother Verulus does not know is that Markarth has a secret. The city was built into the ruins of an ancient Dwemer settlement, and deep beneath the city is a shrine to Namira, the Daedric prince of decay, disease, and revulsion. The shrine is hidden in a location called Reachcliff Cave, accessible through tunnels that most citizens have never explored, and the shrine is occupied by a group of people who worship Namira by engaging in ritual cannibalism. These are not monsters. They are citizens of Markarth. They have jobs and homes and relationships. During the day, they function as normal members of society. At night, or when the opportunity presents itself, they gather in Namira's shrine and consume human flesh as an act of worship. They are led by a woman named Iola, a Breton who serves as Namira's priest and organizes the feasts. Iola approaches you in the Hall of the Dead if you investigate the missing bodies. She recognizes something in you, some potential for understanding what Namira offers. She invites you to meet her at Reachcliff Cave, where she will explain what has been happening and why the bodies have been disappearing. When you arrive, she is standing near the corpse of a dead draugr she has been eating. She explains without shame or hesitation that she serves Namira, that she consumes the dead as an act of devotion, and that she needs your help with a problem. The problem is that the congregation wants fresh meat. The corpses from the Hall of the Dead are old, preserved, not ideal for consumption. Iola has identified a solution, Brother Verulus himself. He is young, healthy, devoted to his god, and his death would serve multiple purposes. It would provide fresh meat for the feast. It would remove the priest who is investigating the missing bodies, and it would demonstrate Namira's power over Arche, the god of life and death, by consuming one of Arche's priests. Iola asks you to lure Brother Verulus to the shrine. She provides you with a spell that will make him follow you without question, a compulsion that overrides his judgment and brings him to the place where he will be killed and eaten. The spell is Namira's gift, a demonstration that she can corrupt even devotion to rival gods. If you bring Verulus to the shrine, the congregation gathers. There are about a dozen of them, regular people from Markarth who have secret lives as cannibals. They watch as you are given the choice to kill Verulus yourself or allow someone else to do it. Either way, he dies on Namira's altar. His body is prepared, and the feast begins. Namira herself appears during the feast, blessing the congregation and offering you a ring as reward for your participation. The ring of Namira increases your stamina, but also grants an ability. When you eat corpses, you gain health and stamina regeneration. The ring transforms cannibalism from a perverse act into a mechanical benefit, rewarding you for consuming human flesh by making you more effective in combat. This is horror of a different nature than what the Dwemer or Falmer represent. The Dwemer disappeared through metaphysical catastrophe. The The Falmer were transformed by systematic oppression. But Namira's cultists choose their horror. They eat human flesh because they want to, because they find spiritual satisfaction in consumption, because Namira offers them purpose through revulsion. The congregation members are not insane. They are not possessed. They are people who have decided that eating corpses brings them closer to their God, and they have built rituals and social structures around that decision. They meet in secret. They support each other. They share the experience of consuming what society considers untouchable, and they do it willingly, repeatedly, for years or decades. Iola is articulate about her devotion. She explains that Namira represents the aspects of existence that people refuse to acknowledge: decay, disease, the inevitable breakdown of all living things. Consuming the dead is accepting that breakdown, participating in it, recognizing that every body will eventually rot and be consumed by something. The cultists are just choosing to be the consumers rather than waiting to be consumed. This theological justification makes the cannibalism more disturbing rather than less. If the cultists were mindless ghouls driven by hunger, they would be easier to categorize as monsters. But they are thinking people who have rationalized their actions through religious framework. They believe they are serving a legitimate deity by performing acts that disgust normal society. They have created meaning from revulsion. The feast itself is described in minimal detail by the game, but the implication is clear. The congregation eats Brother Verulus's body. They consume him completely, leaving nothing for burial or consecration. His god cannot reclaim him because he has been distributed among his killers as nutrition. And Namira is pleased because her followers have honored her through the act of consuming one of her rival's priests. If you refuse to participate, if you walk away from Iola's invitation or kill the congregation instead of joining them, the questline ends. The cult is destroyed or abandoned. But if you participate, if you kill Verulus and accept Namira's ring, you become one of them. You are now a cannibal in good standing with a Daedric prince who rewards you for eating corpses. The Ring of Namira creates a mechanical incentive to continue the practice. Every corpse you encounter can be consumed for health and stamina regeneration. Enemies you kill in combat become resources you can eat for immediate tactical benefit. The ring transforms murder into a multi-step process. Kill, loot, consume, and each consumption is an act of worship to Namira, strengthening your connection to her sphere. This reveals something essential about how Daedric princes operate in Skyrim. They do not force worship. They offer rewards for behaviors they want to encourage, and they let mortals choose whether to participate. Namira does not make you a cannibal. She provides benefits for cannibalism and lets you decide whether those benefits are worth engaging in an act that society considers abhorrent. The cultists in Reachcliff Cave have made that decision. They have weighed the social consequences of being discovered against the spiritual satisfaction of serving Namira, and they have chosen service. They live double lives, maintaining appearances during the day and gathering for feasts when the opportunity arises. They are functional members of Markarth society who happen to eat people in their spare time. This is invisible horror made literal. The cultists are invisible because they look like everyone else. There is nothing that marks them as cannibals. They do not have physical deformities or behavioral tics that give them away. They are your neighbors, your merchants, your guards, and at night they gather in a cave and eat corpses while praying to a goddess of decay. The invisibility extends to the act itself. When cultists eat human flesh, they do not do it publicly. They do it in hidden spaces, behind locked doors, in caves beneath the city. The consumption happens where nobody can see it, where the evidence can be hidden or destroyed. If you had not investigated the missing bodies, if Brother Verulus had not noticed the thefts, the cult could have continued indefinitely without detection. This creates a specific paranoia. After encountering Namira's cult, Every citizen in Markarth becomes suspect. That merchant who was friendly yesterday might gather with others to consume corpses tonight. That guard who patrols the streets might spend his off hours in Reachcliff Cave. There's no way to identify cultists by looking at them. They are hidden in plain sight, integrated into society, indistinguishable from people who do not eat human flesh. The cult also represents something worse than the Dark Brotherhood. The Brotherhood kills for money and religious devotion, but they kill people who are alive. The killing serves a purpose, even if that purpose is nihilistic worship of entropy. Namira's cultists consume corpses, which means they are not directly killing anyone. They are desecrating the dead, violating bodies that cannot resist or protest. The act is pure transgression without even the justification of eliminating threats or serving contracts. Brother Varulus is different because he is killed specifically for the feast, transformed from a living priest into meat through ritual murder. His death serves Namira's purpose in multiple ways. It provides fresh corpse for consumption. It eliminates someone who was investigating the cult, and it demonstrates Namira's power to corrupt devotion to rival gods. Varulus spent his life serving Arche, and his reward is being eaten by people who worship decay. The theological implications are disturbing. Arche is the god who maintains the boundary between life and death. His priests prepare bodies for burial, ensuring they are treated with dignity and respect. Namira is the goddess who glorifies decay and consumption. Her worshippers violate the boundary Arche maintains, treating corpses as food rather than as sacred vessels that require proper treatment. When the cultists consume Varulus, they are making a statement about which god is more powerful. Arche could not protect his priest. Namira could corrupt someone into luring Varulus to his death. The feast is not just consumption. It is a demonstration that decay always wins, that every body will eventually be consumed regardless of how carefully it is protected. The ring of Namira remains with you after the quest. You can choose to wear it or not. You can choose to consume corpses or not. But the option is always there, mechanically integrated into the game as a legitimate tactic. Cannibalism becomes a tool you can use, something that provides concrete benefits in exchange for engaging in an act that would be considered monstrous in any other context. This is how Daedric princes corrupt mortals in Skyrim. They do not force you to serve them. They make service beneficial. They provide rewards that make transgression worthwhile. And they let you convince yourself that accepting those rewards does not fundamentally change who you are. The cultists in Reachcliff Cave believe they are still good people who happen to worship through consumption. They have not abandoned their identities as citizens of Markarth. They have simply added another dimension to their lives, one that requires secrecy and involves eating human flesh. They have compartmentalized their transgression, separating it from their public selves, and they function successfully in both roles. This compartmentalization is the invisible horror, the ability to eat corpses at night and sell goods during the day, the capacity to consume human flesh as an act of worship and then return to normal, social interaction without anyone noticing. The cultists are not monsters who have rejected society. They are members of society who have secret practices that would get them executed if discovered, and you, if you participate, become one of them. You become someone who can kill and eat, and then walk through Markarth as though nothing has changed. You become someone who wears a ring that marks you as Namira's chosen, someone who has participated in ritual cannibalism and received divine blessing for it. And nobody knows except you and the other cultists, and the goddess who watches her followers consume what society insists should be untouchable. The Dwemer vanished, leaving ruins that ask questions nobody can answer. The Falmer were transformed into something that cannot remember what it lost. Calixto killed to resurrect his sister, and created only more death. The Nightingales serve nocturnal forever in exchange for power. The Dark Brotherhood worships entropy and treats murder as prayer. And Namira's cultists eat corpses in hidden caves, finding spiritual satisfaction in consumption that violates every social norm. Each horror operates differently. Each requires different choices, but all of them share a common element. They are invisible until you stumble into them, and by the time you understand what you are seeing, you have already made choices that cannot be unmade. This is the horror of Skyrim, not dragons that announce themselves with fire and thunder, not bandits who attack openly, not monsters that reveal their nature through appearance. The real horror is walking through a world where catastrophes have already concluded, where transformations are permanent, where cults operate in plain sight, where you can join organizations that demand eternal service without fully understanding what that service means until it is too late to withdraw. The ring of a Namira sits on your finger like any other piece of jewelry. It does not corrupt your appearance. It does not announce itself to people you meet. From the outside, it looks like ordinary, enchanted equipment, but you know what it represents. You know what you did to earn it, and you know that every time you consume a corpse, you are performing an act of worship to a Daedric prince who glorifies decay and revulsion. The cult continues operating after the quest concludes. Eola remains in Reachcliff Cave. The congregation members return to their homes in Markarth and resume their normal lives. The bodies continue disappearing from the Hall of the Dead, though perhaps less frequently now that the investigation has been resolved one way or another. The cycle continues because the cultists are not trying to end anything. They are simply maintaining a practice that brings them satisfaction, feeding a hunger that is spiritual rather than purely physical. This distinction matters. The cultists are not eating corpses because they are starving. Markarth has food. They are eating corpses because Namira teaches that consumption of the reviled brings you closer to understanding the true nature of existence. They believe that by eating what others refuse to touch, by embracing decay and disease and death, they are accessing wisdom that normal people cannot comprehend. Whether that wisdom actually exists is unclear. The cultists certainly believe they have achieved something through their practice. They speak about their devotion with conviction. They describe their feasts with reverence. But from the outside, they are simply people eating corpses in a cave, finding meaning in transgression because the alternative is acknowledging that they are engaging in cannibalism without any deeper significance. Namira does not explain herself. She offers the ring and disappears. She does not provide theological treatises or moral justifications. She simply rewards you for participating in her worship and leaves you to determine what that participation means. This is characteristic of how Daedric princes operate. They are not interested in converting mortals through argument. They demonstrate their power, offer rewards for service, and let mortals rationalize their own participation. The horror of Namira's cult is that it is sustainable. The cultists are not going to be caught unless they make catastrophic mistakes. They are not going to stop unless external force destroys them. They have found a practice that satisfies them, and they will continue that practice indefinitely because nothing in their environment prevents them from doing so. The invisible horror continues invisibly, hidden beneath a city that has no idea what happens in the caves below its streets. And if you walk away from the cult, if you refuse Eola's invitation and never participate in the feast, the cult still exists. Your refusal does not end it. The cultists still gather, they still consume. They still worship Namira through acts that would horrify the citizens walking above them. Your choice determines whether you participate, but it does not determine whether the horror exists. This is the final lesson Skyrim teaches about invisible horror. Some nightmares cannot be prevented. Some atrocities will occur regardless of your intervention. You can choose whether to participate, but you cannot choose whether they happen. The Dwemer disappeared whether you existed or not. The Falmer were transformed centuries before you were born. Calixto killed women before you arrived in Windhelm. The Nightingales made their oath generations ago. The Dark Brotherhood has been killing for thousands of years, and Namira's cultists have been eating corpses in caves beneath Markarth since long before you entered the city. Your presence in Skyrim does not create these horrors. It reveals them. You stumble into situations that were already occurring and make choices about how to respond. Sometimes you can stop individual manifestations. You can kill Calixto and end his murders. You can destroy the Dark Brotherhood's sanctuary. You can refuse to join Namira's cult. But the underlying structures persist. There will be other killers. The Brotherhood will rebuild. Other cults exist in other cities. The invisible becomes visible when you investigate, when you follow blood trails and listen to whispers and open doors that should have stayed closed. And once you see what is actually happening beneath the surface of Skyrim's cities and inside its ancient ruins, you cannot unsee it. You carry the knowledge that civilizations can vanish instantly, that transformations can be permanent, that ordinary people can commit extraordinary atrocities, and that deals with supernatural powers come with prices that extend beyond death. Chapter 7. The Aftermath You Inherit. Walk through Skyrim with the knowledge of what you have learned. Every Dwemer ruin you pass is a tomb for a civilization that erased itself through hubris. Every Falmer you fight is a victim of crimes committed thousands of years ago, transformed into something that cannot remember what it lost. Every city you enter might house a serial killer or a cannibal cult or people who have sold their souls to Daedric princes in exchange for power. The horror is not that these things exist. The horror is that they exist normally, integrated into the world so completely that most people never notice them. Guards patrol streets where assassins walk freely. Merchants conduct business in cities built on top of cannibal shrines. Thieves operate with supernatural backing they do not understand. And beneath it all, the ruins of the Dwemer sit empty, their machines still functioning, waiting for inhabitants who will never return. This creates a specific kind of existential weight. You are not the first person to walk through these situations. You are not discovering new horrors. You are encountering horrors that have been operating for decades, centuries, millennia. The Nightingales have been making their oath since the Second Era at least. The Dark Brotherhood has been worshipping Sithis since before recorded history. Namira's cults have existed as long as people have been willing to transgress social norms for spiritual satisfaction. Your choices matter in the moment. You can save individual lives. You can stop specific killers. You can refuse to participate in cults and organizations that demand your soul. But your choices do not change the fundamental nature of Skyrim as a place where catastrophe is historical fact and ongoing reality. The Dwemer discovered something about the nature of divinity and reality that caused their entire race to vanish. That knowledge is still in their ruins, encoded in their texts, preserved in their machines. Future civilizations might make the same discoveries and face the same consequences. The mechanism that erased the Dwemer still exists, waiting for someone else to activate it. The Falmer will continue devolving in darkness, generation after generation, becoming less and less like what they were until even the possibility of recovery disappears completely. They are locked into a transformation that has no endpoint except eventual extinction or evolution into something so different from snow elves that the name becomes meaningless. Serial killers will continue emerging in cities across Skyrim because grief and obsession and madness are constants in human experience. Calixto is dead, but the impulses that drove him exist in other people, waiting for the right circumstances to manifest as murder. The Nightingales will continue guarding the Twilight Sepulchre because the oath never expires, and Nocturnal will always need guards for her portal. New trios will replace old ones as members die and become sentinels. And the cycle will continue until Nocturnal decides she no longer needs the arrangement. The Dark Brotherhood will rebuild after every destruction because the Night Mother's corpse does not decay and Sithis does not die, and people will always want other people dead badly enough to perform the Black Sacrament. Namira's cultists will continue eating corpses in hidden places because transgression provides satisfaction that normal worship cannot match, and there will always be people willing to cross boundaries that society insists should remain inviolate. These are not problems you can solve. They are conditions of existence in Skyrim, as fundamental as the mountains and as permanent as the ruins. You can navigate them, participate in them, refuse them, but you cannot eliminate them. They are the world you inhabit, and they were here before you arrived and will persist after you leave. This realization is the true invisible horror of Skyrim. Not that terrible things happen, but that terrible things are normal. Not that catastrophes occur, but that catastrophes have already occurred, and you're walking through their aftermath. Not that evil exists, but that evil is integrated into social structures and religious organizations and historical legacies so completely that it functions as an ordinary part of reality. The Dwemer vanished because they tried to transcend the limitations of mortality and instead erased themselves from existence. The lesson is clear: some boundaries should not be crossed, but the ruins remain and the machines still work, and future engineers will study Dwemer technology and wonder what they accomplished and whether it could be replicated. The temptation to try what the Dwemer tried will always exist because the promise of transcendence is too attractive to resist permanently. The Falmer were transformed because they trusted the wrong allies and accepted refuge from people who saw them as subjects rather than equals. The lesson is clear: desperation makes you vulnerable to exploitation. But refugees will continue emerging from conflicts across Tamriel, and some of them will accept terrible terms because the alternative is death. The pattern will repeat because the conditions that create it are constants in history. Calixto killed because he could not accept his sister's death and believed murder was an acceptable tool for resurrection. The lesson is clear: grief can be weaponized into atrocity. But people will continue loving each other and dying, and leaving behind survivors who cannot cope with loss. Some of those survivors will rationalize terrible actions as necessary for restoration. The impulse will continue manifesting because love and death are inseparable. The Nightingales serve Nocturnal because they wanted power and were willing to sell their souls to obtain it. The lesson is clear: supernatural bargains come with prices that extend beyond mortal comprehension. But people will continue seeking power through any means available, and Daedric princes will continue offering bargains that seem reasonable in the moment but bind you for eternity. The transactions will continue because the desire for power is inexhaustible. The Dark Brotherhood worships Sithis because they have transformed murder into sacrament and found meaning in death. The lesson is clear: any action can be sanctified through religious framework if you are willing to construct the justification. But people will continue finding purpose in transgression, building communities around shared participation in acts that isolate them from normal society. The cults will continue forming because humans require meaning and will find it in whatever practices provide satisfaction. Namira's cultists eat corpses because they believe consumption of the reviled brings them closer to truth. The lesson is clear: revulsion is subjective and can be overcome through practice and justification. But people will continue seeking spiritual experiences that differentiate them from mainstream society. The boundary crossings will continue because transgression provides identity that conformity cannot match. Every horror in Skyrim teaches a lesson. But the lesson is not how to prevent the horror. The lesson is that the horror is inevitable, that it has already happened, or is currently happening, or will happen in the future regardless of your intervention. You are not the hero who saves the world from catastrophe. You are the person who arrives after the catastrophe and decides how to respond to what remains. The Dragonborn can kill Alduin and save the world from dragon domination. That is the main quest line, the central narrative, the story everyone knows about. But the Dragonborn cannot undo the Dwemer's disappearance, cannot restore the Falmer to what they were, cannot prevent serial killers from emerging, cannot break the Nightingales' oath, cannot destroy the Dark Brotherhood permanently, cannot eliminate Daedric cults. These horrors exist independently of the dragon crisis. They operate on different scales and through different mechanisms. This is what makes them more disturbing than Alduin. Alduin is a clear threat with a clear solution. You fight him and win or lose. The outcome is decisive. But the invisible horrors of Skyrim have no decisive outcomes. They continue regardless of what you do. They are woven into the fabric of the world so thoroughly that removing them would require unmaking fundamental aspects of how Skyrim functions. The Dwemer ruins are tourist attractions and research sites and dungeons to explore. They serve purposes for modern Skyrim even though the Dwemer are gone. Destroying them would eliminate valuable resources and historical knowledge, so they remain, and people study them, and eventually someone will try to replicate what Kagrenak did because the temptation is too strong to resist. The Falmer are monsters that justify Nord claims about defending Skyrim from threats. They are enemies to fight in dungeons, sources of valuable gear and alchemical ingredients. They serve purposes for adventurers and guards, even though they are victims of historical atrocities. Curing them would require magic and resources that nobody is willing to invest in creatures that attack on sight. So they remain twisted and hostile, unable to be saved and too dangerous to ignore. The serial killers are isolated incidents that local guards handle or fail to handle depending on their competence and resources. They create quests for you to solve, opportunities for you to demonstrate your investigative abilities. They serve purposes in the narrative structure of Skyrim even though they destroy lives. Preventing all serial killers would require eliminating grief and obsession and madness, which is impossible. So they continue emerging, and guards continue investigating, and some are caught while others escape. The Nightingales are the mechanism through which the Thieves Guild maintains its supernatural backing. They enable an entire questline about thieves and Daedric politics. They serve purposes in the game structure even though their oath is eternal servitude. Eliminating the Nightingales would collapse the Thieves Guild, removing content and narrative from the game. So the organization persists, recruiting new members every generation, binding them to Nocturnal forever. The Dark Brotherhood is one of the most popular questlines in Skyrim, providing player access to assassination contracts and interesting characters. They serve purposes in the game's appeal, even though they are a murder cult. Permanently destroying the Brotherhood would remove content that many players enjoy, so the organization is designed to be rebuilt even after its sanctuary is burned, ensuring the questline can continue. Namira's cult is a disturbing side quest that rewards players with a unique ring and demonstrates the darker aspects of Daedric worship. They serve purposes in the game's variety of content, even though they are cannibals. Eliminating all Daedric cults would remove entire dimensions of Skyrim's religious landscape. So the cults exist, and players can choose to participate or refuse, and the choice matters only for that individual playthrough. The horror is that these elements are not bugs or glitches or mistakes in Skyrim's design. They are intentional features, carefully constructed to provide specific kinds of experiences and narratives. The game wants you to encounter vanished civilizations and transformed victims and serial killers, and eternal oaths and murder cults and cannibals. These encounters are content, gameplay, quests, stories. They are what makes Skyrim interesting. But from an in-universe perspective, they are catastrophes and atrocities, and ongoing nightmares. The Falmer did not choose to be enemies in a video game. They were snow elves who were systematically destroyed across generations. The Dark Brotherhood members are not just interesting NPCs. They are people who worship death and kill for religious satisfaction. The disconnect between the game's perspective and the world's perspective is where the true horror lives. You play Skyrim to have adventures and collect loot and complete quests, but if you stop treating it as a game and start treating it as a world, the adventures become invasions of tomb sites, the loot becomes grave robbing, and the quests become participation in systems that perpetuate horror. Every Dwemer ruin you explore is disturbing a mass grave. Every Falmer you kill is murdering a victim who was already destroyed by historical atrocities. Every quest you complete for the Dark Brotherhood is helping a murder cult continue operating. The game does not force you to think about this. It presents these activities as normal gameplay, as things you are supposed to do to progress and gain experience and collect rewards. But the content of what you are actually doing, if examined closely, is participating in the aftermath of catastrophe, and occasionally contributing to ongoing atrocity. This is the final layer of invisible horror in Skyrim. The horror is that you can do all these things and not feel horrified because the game's framing normalizes them. You can join the Dark Brotherhood and complete every contract without thinking of yourself as a serial killer, because the game calls you an assassin and provides narrative justification. You can eat corpses with Namira's ring, equipped, and think of it as a useful tactic rather than cannibalism, because the game treats it as a mechanical benefit. You can kill hundreds of Falmer and think of them as enemies rather than victims, because the game spawns them in dungeons and makes them attack on sight. The invisible becomes visible only when you stop accepting the game's framing and start examining what you are actually doing. And once you see it clearly, once you understand that every action has implications beyond the immediate mechanical benefit, Skyrim transforms from a fantasy adventure into a horror landscape where catastrophe is historical fact and ongoing reality. You cannot save the Dwemer. You cannot restore the Falmer. You cannot prevent all murders. You cannot break eternal oaths. You cannot destroy Daedric cults permanently. You can only choose how you respond to the horror that already exists, that has always existed, that will continue existing after you stop playing. And that choice, ultimately, is what determines whether Skyrim is a game you play for fun, or a nightmare you participate in with full awareness of the implications. The Dwemer vanished into questions that will never be answered. The Falmer descended into darkness they cannot escape. The killers walked among the living before being stopped. The Nightingales serve forever in exchange for power. The Brotherhood worships death across centuries. The cultists consume what others cannot touch. And you walk through all of it, making choices that matter in the moment, but cannot change the fundamental nature of a world built on catastrophe and sustained by atrocity. This is Skyrim's invisible horror. Not the dragons everyone can see, but the nightmares hidden beneath the surface, integrated into the world so completely that most people never notice them. The ruins that ask questions, the victims who cannot be saved, the killers who hide in plain sight, the oaths that never expire, the cults that worship through transgression, and the player who walks through all of it, deciding whether to participate or refuse, knowing that the horror continues regardless.